The practice of giving, and most especially our heart attitude toward giving, is not a peripheral issue in the teachings of Jesus. In fact, it is one of the central aspects of our discipleship to Him. It's also a counterintuitive pathway to joy. Now, the type of giving we're referring to right now is the tithe. Now, this is a word probably we don't use often and could be misunderstood, but the Hebrew word for tithe is maaser. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. And the meaning of that is 10%. Now, W.A. Criswell said, the purpose of tithing is to secure not the tithe, but the tither. Not the possessions, but the possessor. Not your money, but you for God. So, giving the kingdom way has 4 P's, but for now, we'll just look at the first P, and that's called prioritized giving. Prioritized giving. Now, Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, seek first God's kingdom and what God wants. And then here's the payoff. All your other needs will be met as well. So in Matthew 6:33, Jesus talked about prioritizing God or putting God first. So if we're somebody that says, I want to follow Jesus, then that means He is our King. So that means His kingdom matters most in our lives. This is the reason why we start with prioritized giving. We give to God as a priority. So question, what do you seek first in your life right now? What do you say is your priority in your life right now? Because friends, the way we use our money and time indicates to us what's first. That if you want to know what's first place in your life, just look at 2 things. 1, what does your schedule look like? 2, where do you spend your money? Because it doesn't matter what we say, what's first in our life. We just look at these 2 things. The way I spend my time, the way I spend my money, tells us what's really important in our life. So, for us that say we want to put God first, for us that says God is number 1 in our lives. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2. Paul writes this and he said, on the first day of every week. Now, the context here is that they received their salary on the last day. So meaning, at the beginning of the week, they have their amounts in full. So on the first day of every week, that happens to be a Sunday for us, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with this income. Now, this is so important to understand. Paul was telling them to prepare their gifts even before coming to worship. Now, this is also important. Notice this is a commitment. This is not a random act of giving. There's a decision here. There is a consistency here. That Paul is not calling us to random acts of giving because good people do random acts of giving. You're here now, you're listening to this, and I'm about sure, most probably sure, you're a good person. Everybody does random acts of giving. So there was this article that talked about how do you know if it's a random act of giving? Well, it's based on an emotion, most especially when challenged to give, or mostly we give out of guilt. Or it could be that we see a need and we want to meet that need, or we see or hear a sad story and we want to do something about that sad story, or random giving depends on how much cash flow I have right now. Now, this is very different from what Paul is saying. That Paul is saying this is generosity, prioritized giving, that is very different from random acts of giving. That for followers of Jesus, this is a planned, this is intentional, this is about commitment and consistency. So let's read again. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income. So it says, the first thing we do before we even pay off our mortgage, pay our bills, buy groceries, before we even pay off our cards, the first thing we do is to pay off that which belongs to God. First day of every week. It's like, for example, when you go apple picking or cherry picking, you fill your basket with fruits, right? And then you give the first fruits, the top, the most important, the best ones. Not the ones at the bottom, not the rotten ones, not the leftovers. Now, why give first to God? Why prioritize? Because whatever we place at the top, it will take precedence over everything else. Proverbs 3 verse 9 says, honor God with everything you own, give Him the first and the best. Now, some of us might be saying, but Pastor Josh, I'd like to do this. The problem is I can't afford to do this right now. We, your pastors, would like to say to you, you cannot afford not to do this. Because here's the principle. Now, this is not just about money. This is really in any area of our life. Whatever we want God to bless our life in, we put Him first. So, for example, if you have a relationship, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a fiancé, or husband and wife, if we want God to bless our marriage, to bless our relationship, then we put Him first in our marriage. If we want God to bless our career, then we put Him first in our career. In the same way, if we want God to bless our finances, we put Him first in our finances. Because whatever or wherever God is put in first, He blesses, not the leftovers. Now, so I remember somebody asking, but Pastor Josh, God, He's rich, right? Why is He asking for our money? He doesn't need our money. Yes, that's actually true. He doesn't need our money. He doesn't want our money. That's the truth. So why give to God? The reason behind it is because of what it represents. Every time we look at our money, it's not easy to let go, right? You know why? Because it symbolizes our time. The reason why we have money is we poured a lot of time into it. We poured our talent into it. We poured our sweat into it. Sometimes our blood and tears. In other words, we sacrificed a lot to be able to earn that money. And that's why it's not that easy to let go. And guess what? God knows that. And that's why our money, no matter how small it may seem, is important. Because of what it represents. It represents your heart. My money represents my heart. And it not only represents our jobs, but it represents who we are. Matthew 6 verse 21 said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So, take for example, if you are into investing or into stocks, and you want a piece of the business, for example, of Apple. So what do? You buy some stocks of Apple. So when you do that, you become part of their family, you become part of their business. And we become interested in what they do. The next day, what do? You open up the internet and you look at the stocks. Are they rising? Is it falling? Meaning to say, we begin to care. Why? Because we are now part owners. You have an investment in it. In other words, wherever we put our money in, that's what we start caring about. And God is saying, when you prioritize giving back to me, it communicates that I am priority, that you care about me. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, the book that is closest to the New Testament says, bring all tithes into the storehouse, so that there will be enough food in my temple. And if you do, I'll open up the windows of heaven for you and pour out a blessing so great you won't have room enough to take it in. Look at this. Try it. Let me prove it to you. You know what God is saying here? God is saying, try me. He's saying to us, let me prove it to you. In another translation, it says, test me in this. Now, did you know this is the only place in the entire scriptures where we see God say, test me, try me, dare me. And God is saying, if you do, if you put me to the test, watch, see how I will prove myself faithful.